Welcome, gang, to this module on holding. This is going to be a presentation that will give you some guidance on the use of the FMC and the FMS in entering holding information, reading holding information that the FMC provides to you, and altering any changes that may be necessary for holding. Hopefully, with this, you'll have a very good understanding of what holding operations will be and some of the information that it provides to you. So with that, it is going to be a general discussion on holding, but I'd like to be a little bit more specific on some of the topics that we'll talk about in this module. We'll be talking about building holds in the FMC. We'll talk about leading holds prior to entering a hold, which very often happens in the ATC environment, where they may establish a hold prior to you getting to a hold, and then conditions change and they delete the hold. And we'll also cover exiting a hold after you've entered the hold and in the holding pattern. That is a separate and different operation than deleting the hold prior to entering the hold. Now, one of the things that will be important also is explaining some of the information that is on the holding page and how that is important for some decision making that you may be involved in when you get involved in holds. So we'll certainly be covering some of that. And then there's a uniqueness to holding in an RNAV waypoint. Not that it's much different, it's just the way the holding instructions will be provided to you. And so we'll talk about that and clear up that distinction. Now, one of the more important parts of what I want to cover with what we're going to do here is the explanation of the hold available time, which is part of the information that you will have in the holding page once you enter an EFC. So we'll give you an explanation and a presentation on that. So as we get started here, one of the things that I want to do is to start with an example of getting some holding instructions. So here, ATC has given us expect to hold at JFAR, stand by for holding instructions. That's typical of the way that ATC may give you a start at the expectation of holding so that you can get ready to copy the holding information to be able to repeat back to it. So as we look at our nav display, we can see we're on an arrival here. This is an arrival into an airport. And as we look at the nav page, we can see that JFAR is out here ahead of us, the second waypoint that's ahead of us, and that is going to be our holding fixed according to what we were initially given. So that's going to be what we'll expect to hold at. And once we get the holding instructions, we're going to enter that. So with that, what we're going to do is go to the FMS and select, as a first step, select the hold button, which gives us this page, route hold. Now, what automatically comes up in that information is a holding that is maybe already part of the arrival, where they may have published holding patterns as part of an arrival, or if you have already put an approach into the FMC, it could be a holding fix for a missed approach. And in this case, that happens to be what is here. So this automatically came up. So after we selected that, and as I explained here, it's either going to be part of the star or a missed approach. And so, as I mentioned, Denmore is the missed approach in this case here. What we're going to have to do is line select L6 to bring up the next hold, and that's depicted here in this step 3. So we'll select that next hold, and then with that, it brings up this page. And notice that what we have here are some blanks in the L6 position here, and over on this side, we have an option to hold in your present position, which is another step and another situation that we'll explain at a later time. But anyway, so I'm going to select that next hold, and with that, we'll line select JFAR, which is depicted over here in the L2 position. We're going to bring it down into that L6 position and fill in these squares here. So with that, once we put that information in, what we're going to do is create JFAR as our fix, and it's going to give us standard holding information. And in this case, what it automatically did was select the inbound course into JFAR along our arrival. So what's important to understand when you get to this page, the positions that can be modified is this L2 position, L3 position, the 4L position, the 5L position, and then over here on the right side, you can do the R3 position and the position, the holding speed. So those are what you can other entries in other than what comes up standard as we have depicted here. Now, in this case, as I said, what this is showing us, and this is where you now start to bring in the nav display page. This is important when you're doing work on a hold. And again, I want to emphasize how important this nav display page is anyway, for just constant cross-check during all of your flight phases. What it did is, notice it has in the 2L position, you can put in the radial. In the 3L position, you can put the inbound course, and you can also put the quadrants. But in this case, what it automatically did, because this route, I can see that it pretty much is along the heading here, that it's going to be 146 kind of something over in this area here when we make this turn. And so it automatically selected the inbound course in a standard turn, which is a right turn. And it depicts that here with a white dotted line. So it's telling you that this is the pattern that you have potentially brought up to execute. But notice we haven't executed it. So the holding pattern is displayed on that nav display. That's what is important for you to understand. And I can't emphasize how important that nav display is to confirm any of the entries that you're going to make in the 2L, 3L, 4L position over here. Back up everything with what you see on the nav display. And if you don't have a nav display depicted, then select the proper range to be able to see that pattern as you build it. So in this case, the present display shows the pattern that is depicted here. So now what they're telling us to do here for this hold is the holding instructions are to hold on the inbound course, left-hand turns, 5-mile legs. So that means we've got to make some adjustments here. In this case, what we're going to do is type in a 5 in the scratch pad, enter that 5 into L5, leg distance. So we want to put that distance in this leg distance page or position right here as part of the pattern. Now, what we want to do for the next step is, after we put the 5 in the scratch pad and enter here, we now need to put a slash with an L, because we want to change this information from a right turn to a left-hand turn. Anytime you're making an entry on the legs page or on this hold page, if there is a term after a slash, you need to enter the slash so that the system understands that the information that follows is to go on the right, in this case here, the right side of the slash. So what we're going to do is put an L3 slash in that scratch pad, enter it in this 3L position. I'll come over here to do that, okay? And see, now we have a reverse highlight for what we've entered in both distance and the direction of turn. after I do that, before I execute it, I want to look at my nav display, and I see now I do have it on the proper inbound course, and now I have a left-hand turn, and I can't necessarily tell what the distance is. We will get a different pattern once we execute it, but this shows it's a left-hand turn, and since you have that 5 miles in there, it should come up that it says 5-mile page. So here's what's important, gang. This I want to really emphasize. Make sure your partner, whoever entered this, get a confirmation of the information before you execute it. This is good VVM. Now, what I'm also going to make a case for is if it is the pilot monitoring, the pilot not flying, that is entering all this information, the pilot flying should be looking at everything that was being done. You should monitor everything that was being entered. I can't imagine situations that are so demanding that you couldn't always be cross-checking the information that is being entered here and checking it on your nav display as you're operating the aircraft. So you want to make sure that both of you agree with the information that is going to be executed before the execution. Most important. So now we have the information activated and we have the pattern established. Notice that pattern is a little bit bigger than it was with the white dotted line, which has the 5 miles. What has automatically happened here, once you put that information in, you've got a hold available time, and I'm going to explain that hold available time in some subsequent slides. But now what we've got, some information that's very important to us in terms of our fuel situation for completing the flight after the hold, or if you have an alternate that might be a consideration, your time associated with this present hold that may affect any subsequent routing that would take you to an alternate. We'll explain that a little bit later. So anyway, confirm on the mode control panel that you are in LNAV, because this is going to automatically enter that pattern. The only way it's going to do that is if you're in LNAV. Very often you got to be careful and you're not in a heading mode here because it won't enter the holding pattern. So that's important, and make sure you're cross-checking that information. Okay, so we have that confirmed on the nav display. And now what ATC has done is change our holding instructions. Now they want us to hold southwest of JFAR on the 050 degree inbound course, 10-mile legs. Expect further clearance at some time. So now we're going to be holding it. This is an RNAV fix. So what they do when they give you holding instructions with an RNAV fix, such as JFAR is, they're going to give you an inbound course to hold on, not a radial. So that is why in this L2 and L3 position, you have the option to put in an inbound course, and they gave us that information, 050. Notice what it automatically does is set up a radial of 230, which is 180 degree difference, and it gives us a quadrant, southwest. So this is a distinction when you have an RNAV fix. If they give you holding instructions based on a nav fix itself, they'll still give you the radial information. But in this case here with RNAV, they're giving us the inbound course. So notice now what we've done is put in the 050. We put that information in here, entered it in 3L, and now look at our nav display. We can see that we now have a new holding pattern. And since we had put in left-hand turns previously, that's still in there. So what we're going to do, we see it's a left-hand turn. So as we enter the inbound heading in 3L, in the 5 miles in the leg distance in the legs page here, we can see 050, 10-mile legs. We've got the depicted pattern here. We've got an execute light, confirm with your partner, and then execute it. So now what we have is holding, we're at JFAR is the next fix, and then it's automatically going to hold at that fix. As I mentioned before, we've got this full available time. We'll come up on some of those explanations. Now, another thing that's really important, after you execute the hold, if you're in VNAV on the mode control panel, which generally you should be, especially for arrival. So what the aircraft is automatically going to do is slow to the holding speed 3 minutes prior to entering the hold. You can see over here that what we're doing is getting within that 3 minutes, and what has happened is the speed in VNAV has automatically changed to come back to 188 knots, which was the best holding speed here, clean, for the given condition of the aircraft and the altitude. And you can see that that's the new command speed in magenta because we are in an FMC mode, which is VNAV. And you can see even here that we're in the VNAV mode. So the aircraft is automatically going to slow down. Now let's talk a little bit about this hold time available. What is important to understand with hold time, that means that when you leave the holding fix and continue on the arrival and fly the approach, you will land with the reserve fuel that you entered in the init page on the FMC when you initially entered the flight. So for instance, if you had 5,000 pounds as your reserve fuel that you entered on that init page when you set up for this flight, that's what's going to be predicated on calculating this hold time. So let's look at some situations here that are depicted with different hold times. Here, what we had is no hold time or no expected further clearance time. So in this case, what it did is calculate, you could hold there for 2 hours and 4 minutes, leave the fix at the end of that time, and then arrive with 5,000 pounds after you make the approach and land. Now, in this case here, what I've got is a note here. This is my foot. Always check the progress page for an accurate fuel based on that entry. So here in this case here, we have 13,000 pounds of fuel on board the aircraft right now. This is going to take us into the holding pattern with one turn and then leave the fix, continue on the arrival, make an approach and land. And the progress page is showing us that we're going to land with 12,000 pounds of fuel. Now, in this case here, we've been given a hold of 1 hour. 19:15 is our expected further clearance time. So now you can see what the calculation did in the computer is to reduce that hold available time. What this is telling me is that after that 1 hour hold, I can leave that fix, fly the arrival, make the approach, and land with 8.5 thousand pounds of fuel on board. Okay? So that is telling me after that time period, I still have 1 hour and 7 minutes that I can continue to hold there and then leave the fix after that time and arrive with 5,000 pounds. Now that comes over to this area here, which gives us a little bit more information about an extended time period. So this is a 2 hour hold. This has us holding for 2 hours. And after 2 hours, we can leave the fix, make the approach, and this gives us a little bit of a cushion on that 5,000 pounds. But notice we go to the prog page. This is what you got to consider to be accurate. Notice we're going to be less than 5,000 pounds. So what I've tried to illustrate to you here, gang, this is valuable information for general planning purposes. But if you have alternates that you have to maybe consider because of weather conditions and things like that, well, this is very valuable information. But what is most important is never just trust that information without verifying on the progress page what your actual fuel is going to be for landing. I hope that is somewhat understandable. Sometimes it's confusing, but I hope that there's some understanding of this. This is a very valuable piece of information if you understand what it's telling you. So in these 3 different scenarios, I'm not going to spend too much time on this because I explained it without these bullet points. But this is important to understand. Anytime you have a hold put in here, it's going to assume that you'll at least do one turn and hold, which is this situation right here. This, we're going to have many circles in the holding pattern for a whole hour, this for 2 hours. But in the end, what it's telling you is that what your fuel is going to be on the prior pace. That's the most important thing to consider with all of this. Okay, in this case here, we're about to enter a hold. The aircraft is slowing, approaching the hold. As we see here, it's slowing down to a new bug speed here at 180 knots. Now, in this case, what the aircraft did initially, as it went into the hold, it kind of came out on the outbound side. Now it's turning back to the inbound course and enter the hold. So that's what we're looking at here in this depiction here. And then it's going to turn back and enter the hold for whichever one of the conditions is that they gave us with an EFC. But here's what's very important to understand, and that's what I have under 3 here. I have the indice for the height you are above a VNAV path descent, to be on a VNAV path vertically. And we're going to be very high. So they anticipate these situations here, because once I'm given clearance to leave the fix and continue on the arrival, I'm going to have to lose 2,669 feet to regain the path. Now that means managing the aircraft. So you got to be prepared to use what I call tools here to regain the path. And we're going to have separate lessons on that. We'll have a lot of information about how to do that, what are the ways to do that, and how to monitor that until you get back on path. So here's what we've done is we're in the holding pattern at this point now, and they've given us clearance to exit the hold after you're established in the pattern. Now, what we're looking at, once we do that, okay, I go to the hold page, and this prompt on 6R is exit hold. So I'll execute that. When I execute that, then I'm going to get a white dotted line to give me my potential course to exit the holding pattern, as we see here on our nav display. So what you want to do is notice that, and then go ahead and execute, and you will exit the hold immediately by making a turn back. You won't fly the whole pattern, making a turn back early, back to the holding fixed, and then you'll depart the holding fixed. Now, one of the things that's important when it comes to having executed the exit hold is that it is going to hold the speed, the holding speed of 188 knots until you get to the fixed, and then it will resume normally the VNAV speed that is programmed for your descent. But up until that point, you would be holding your holding speed. Now, if they have you increase the speed, you're just going to have to do that on your FMC. So once you execute that, this turns magenta, and you're back to exiting the holding pattern. Now, we're going to talk about here, if you had a hold that you already put in your hold page, how do we delete a hold if they cancel that hold prior to you entering the holding pattern? So in this case, what we're going to do is delete that hold. So with that, select delete, which is down here in the FMS pattern here, okay? Put delete in the scratch pad there, and then select the delete, or select 2L, which brings the delete up in here and gives you a delete of that hold at position, which is here in number 3, okay? So what we did is make this clear of the hold. So now we've got the hold out of the way, but what we need to do is close the route discontinuity that's here. So in this case, as we look at the chart and we look at what we actually have in the FMC legs page as part of the routing, the next fix after Jafar is Piglet. So what we're going to do is put Piglet down in the line select Piglet, goes into the scratch pad, and then put it up into the blank series here and close it up and then execute it. Notice here we've got it up here, it's reverse highlighted, meaning we haven't executed anything. It's potential to do that. And then confirm the routing and then go ahead and execute it. All right, folks, this is the end of that presentation. I hope it gives you some understanding of the hold page, the functions of the hold page, how to use it, and especially in conjunction with the nav display. Draw yourself a picture and don't rely on just looking in the FMC for holding information. I've seen that a number of times where people just don't get that nav display up to look at the display and they wind up entering wrong information. It's very hard to enter wrong information if you understand what your instructions are and you can look at a picture of it. Can't emphasize that enough. Okay, enough of me, enough of this, and let's go ahead and close this out. As always, wish you good flying. Take care of their passengers, especially if the little old lady from Pasadena is on board. God bless you all, gang, and look forward to some more of this. I'm going to really start to get into some VNAV functions and how to manage VNAV when you're not only on a profile, but when ATC forces you off those VNAV profiles. God bless everyone.